Konnichiwa, everyone. We are back with our final episode with Shannon. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have chatting to her. She is just such a phenomenal expert and knowledgeable person to have around. So in this episode, we're touching on a little bit of the finance issues. How do we get finance? What are the tax implications? And what effect COVID-19 has had on the property market here in Japan. So please stay tuned. Let me know what you think. Now, when we want to buy here in Japan or even want to rent, the initial amount that we need to put down is rather large.
Yes.
When you rent or when you buy as a foreigner. So is there a way that a foreigner can gain finance here?
Yes. So I guess there's two separate questions. In terms of rentals, there's not really a mechanism for finance. You know, people sometimes are able to put the initial fees onto a credit card, depending on which agency they're going through as the listing agency, the one that actually manages the property. That can be possible. Sometimes people can take out a small loan in their home country to cover those expenses. Sometimes companies will pay them up front. Either the company bears it or the employee has to pay it back. The other possibility is that some companies are willing to some agencies are willing to negotiate lowering the initial fees in exchange for increasing the monthly rent. I mean, you end up paying the same amount over time, but that can be a good way to get around those high fees at the beginning. But when it comes to buying, it's a little trickier for foreigners. So unfortunately at this point, except for a few countries in Asia, so I think Hong Kong, Taiwan, maybe some of the Asian countries banks in those countries will lend to citizens of those countries to buy property overseas. Because it's actually Japan is the second largest property investment market in the entire world for this reason. In China, you can't own the land. So a lot of Chinese investors will come here and buy property because it's something you can actually own. And they do the same in the US, which is the top property investment market, by the way. So those, you know, if you're from one of those countries, you may have some financing options. Otherwise, if you're not and you don't have a residence status, so a work visa, a spouse visa, that sort of thing, then basically there is no way for you to get a loan from a Japanese bank to buy a property in Japan. If you have a work visa or a spouse visa and you don't yet have permanent residence in Japan, there are some options still. There are a few banks that will lend, and usually they have either a lower LTV, so they'll only lend, say, 80% or 70% of the purchase price. They may have a shorter loan term, so the standard in Japan being 35 years, sometimes they will lend as short term as 15 years or 20 at the maximum if you don't have permanent residence. And then the third thing that they'll do is just jack up the interest rate. And they may do all three or a combination of any of those. And so, you know, but Japan's interest rates are in the 0 point something% range.
Wow.
So high interest in Japan is still something on the order of 3-4%, which is competitive when you look at other international markets. So even though it's maybe unfair or it's not the same terms that a local would get, it still can be quite a deal and worth doing. And because the prices, the thing though is that the prices are so low, if you're looking at those condos that I was mentioning before, you wouldn't be able to find a bank, even if you had the proper resident status, that would lend on that because it's just not worth their time. So until you're over, say, 50,000 US, 5 million yen to 10 million yen, or 100,000 US approximately, you just need to pay in cash, and there's really no other way, no matter who you are, even if you're Japanese. If you have permanent residency, you basically have almost every option that would be available to a citizen. And the terms here can be extremely favorable. So you can get 100% of the purchase price. You can even borrow for expenses, all at a 0 point something% interest rate. So yes, you're a little over the value of the property and your loan, but it's essentially a free place
Yeah.
as long as you pay the mortgage payments until the loan is paid off. So it just depends on who you are and what your situation is.
All right. So for someone that doesn't have residency right now, well, yeah, and is still finding its way, the cash buy would be the best
Yes.
option, and of
Yes.
course the cheapest option. As far as I remember, when we worked it out, if it is over a 5-year period, renting versus purchasing in the same type of area, same type of class, purchasing is anyway cheaper.
Yes. And yes, it definitely is. Um,
Um, Now, I wanted to ask, so what are the typical return on investments, the typical net yield that we can look at here in Japan?
so that depends on where you're looking. So if
Mhm.
you're aiming for sort of um, one of the hot locations in Tokyo, where the demand for rentals is quite stable and probably won't change much over the next few decades, you're looking at somewhere on the order of 3 to 4%, maybe 5% if you're lucky. Um, but if you're looking at sort of suburbs or, lower priced properties, not luxury properties, not in the newest buildings, maybe built in the 80s, early 90s, that sort of thing. Right now we're seeing yields around, 9, 10% at the most, depending on which city we're talking about. Um, that's a little better than we've seen in recent years. And I think the reason for that is that with the corona situation, a lot of investors have been trying to sell off Airbnb properties. Um,
Oh.
and because there's no demand for those right
Mm.
now. And some of those people have loans and they just can't afford to make those payments if they have zero income. So there's a little bit of a sell off there. And there's, I think, a little bit of uncertainty whether the Olympics will happen next year, sort of how quickly things will recover globally. And so you're starting to see some people panic a little bit and list their properties at lower prices than maybe they would have been listed for last year or the year before. But yeah, I think if you're patient and you're working with the right person, you can find affordable places that have quite healthy yields. And again, that's with that protection of the guarantor arrangement. So you don't have to factor in quite as much of the downside sort of risk analysis into that projection. You just have to, of course, account for the fact that it may become vacant at some point and then you'll have to fill it again.
Yeah, well, which is any investor factor
Sure.
that to like 3 to 10% of it in any way, and when they
Exactly.
run their numbers. The last thing that I want to ask you is, how did this pandemic affect the property market in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, so again, it's a little bit soft right now.
Mm.
One thing is that a lot of people that maybe would have listed their properties to sell or chosen to move around this time have decided to wait. So I've been helping a couple of clients that are looking at properties. And when we make calls to the listing agents that for the places we see in the database, they tell us, oh, actually, we don't want to do any showings right now because of COVID, and our seller is unsure if they're going to move forward. I've gotten rental inquiries where people have asked me to help them move and then have decided that they weren't really comfortable moving and paying all of those fees up to move when they weren't sure if they were going to keep their job and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of the people that can hold off right now kind of are. Um, they're trying to wait and list their property when there's a healthier market. But right now, the people that really need to sell are finding more of a buyer's market for that
Mm.
reason. Um, so yeah, I mean, but the in general, the property values in Japan don't change right away because rents aren't reset right away. And so the Japanese property prices sort of take a couple of years to reflect the macroeconomic situation. So if it ends up being just temporary, maybe
Yeah.
it won't have much of an impact.
You see, that's actually a really good place to invest in.
Yeah, I think so. And again, the Japanese tenants, even the foreign tenants that live here, because all of them have work visas and have been screened by the Japanese government. They're required to have college education. So, sort of on average, you're pulling from a pool of tenants that's likely to be more respectful, even if you're renting to foreigners, because their visas are on the line. They have a strong incentive to, to not mess around while they're here. So you have them, and then you have the Japanese tenants who tend to be quite polite. I mean, it's not universal. I own some investment properties, and just like anywhere, there are some single men that are quite slobby, and so we've had some real doozies in terms of the mess that we're encountered with when people move out. But by and large, it's quite cheap to renovate an apartment because it's considered to be the standard thing to do. So just to replace all the wallpaper, maybe even the flooring, it, as a landlord, isn't that bad, and you can often charge the tenant if they've really made a mess of things for those costs. So it's an attractive place to invest. The property taxes are quite low. Condos are generally well managed.
What are the property taxes that we can look at?
Yeah, so it's a couple percent annually, but there are some deductions and reductions based on the size of the building or the purpose of the building. So if you're investing, you don't really get to take advantage of those. But if you're looking to buy for your own residential use, there are reductions in that. But yeah, so I mean, on a typical condo, you could expect to pay somewhere between 150 to 200,000 yen, which is a couple of $1,000s a year. And insurance is affordable as well. You buy a 10-year policy up front, 5-year earthquake policy, 10-year fire policy. And yeah, again, for a condominium in a concrete building, which is the safest type, you would pay a couple thousand US, 200,000 Japanese yen for 10 years.
That is really good. Wow. The more I find out, the more I'm just like, yes, let's do this.
Yeah.
So Shannon,
I think the main barrier is language.
Yes.
And it's understanding, knowing what a Japanese tenant would look for in a property. So being able to screen properties for the ones that are, quite easy to fill. That's something that requires, either your own research and your own local knowledge, or, a trusted agent or partner to help you sort through the opportunities and find the ones that are going to be winners for you.
So luckily I've got your cell phone number now. How can other expats get hold of you when they are in need of any property advice or anything that they want to rent a property or purchase some or some investments? How can they get hold of you?
Sure. Well, the name of my agency is Expat Properties Japan. So if you Google that, it'll pop right up. You can also email connect@Expat Properties Japan. There's a search form on the website. So if you're looking for something and you already know what you want, you can fill that out. If you're not sure and you just want to chat with me about your situation and whether investing might be right for you, you can just shoot me an email and we can set up a time to chat and take it from there.
Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. Guys, she's truly helped me and my husband phenomenally much about all the property investments that we were thinking at, the ways forward. I truly recommend Shannon. So yes, guys, make use of this opportunity. She knows the ins and outs of the expat market, specifically here in Japan. So yeah, all the guys that I know that from my country, I do believe this is a great place to start investing in. Shannon is your girl if you want to get hooked up. And I'll put all her details in the description as well down here. Remember to subscribe to the channel. And Shannon, thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you, Daphne. It's been a lot of fun. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Definitely. Hi, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this 3-part series with Shannon, our property expert. Yeah, I found it absolutely fascinating and interesting. I actually love the property market here. Let me know what you think. If there's any questions that you might have, please do feel free to connect with Shannon. You may email her on connect@expatpropertiesjapan.com. She is very helpful, and she should be ready to help you guys with all that. Remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel and stay tuned for all of the rest of the journey here in Japan.